My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is my most sorrowful duty to announce to you the death of my beloved mother, the Queen.
The golden crown may be on his head, but it never actually belonged to him. A shadow trailed King Charles from the moment he got to the throne. It wasn't just the ghost of his late mother, Queen Elizabeth, or the grandeur of a monarchy fighting to remain relevant. That was her, Princess Diana, her remembrance, her legacy. Diana's unseen presence has plagued every step of Charles's rule, and no matter how many paintings are hung, how many speeches he delivers, or how many gems are polished, Diana's face remains in the hearts of the people. Charles was aware of the situation. He sensed it. Every time he waved from a royal balcony, he was confronted with a sea of quiet eyes asking the same question, "Why are you there?" rather than her son. For years, the firm worked tirelessly to update the royal script. They attempted to rehabilitate Camilla. They attempted to cover up the affair, the treachery, and the anguish. They staged coronations, scripted smiles, and hoped that time would obliterate memories. However, the people never completely forgave. Not really. And Charles never fully avoided the consequences of what he had done to his wife, boys, and the institution itself. And now the weight has crushed him. Behind closed palace doors, something incredible has happened. For weeks, murmurs became louder about Charles's health, mental condition, and increasing seclusion from public life. There were stories of yelling bouts, hurried meetings with advisors, and even silent visits from Prince William, who sent a single message: "It's time." In the most startling royal twist in decades, King Charles has apparently said the unthinkable: "I'm abdicating." And this isn't a drill. There is no palace leak, no half-denials, no spinning from courtiers. The plan is in action. The firm is prepared, and the whole world is watching. But this isn't the only surprise. Charles is not just stepping down, but also naming his successors. And in a break with centuries of tradition and ushering in a new era, the names on his lips were not simply William, but William and Catherine, joint heirs, equal rulers, a king and queen formed not in controversy but by service. Tonight, we'll look at what led to Diana's dramatic abdication, the fight behind the scenes, and why, after all these years, her children are finally getting the crown she was never permitted to wear. This is not simply a fresh chapter. This is a reckoning. He had waited his entire life for the crown, and when he finally received it, he could hardly bear it. King Charles's rule has always felt like an unwelcome inheritance. For 70 years, he stood beneath Queen Elizabeth II's long shadow, carrying out tasks with a practiced grin and rigid posture, fully aware that the people adored her but tolerated him. When the Queen died and Charles inherited the throne, many people expected him to embrace the opportunity to establish a new monarchy. Instead, the weight started to crush him almost instantly. Charles's approval ratings were consistently lower than those of Prince William and Catherine. A large percentage of the British population, particularly the younger generations, never really embraced him. They recalled the cassettes, the treachery, cold interviews. Diana's voice, calm and sorrowful, resonates across time. There were 3 of us in this marriage. Charles was fully aware of this. He didn't just hear it in interviews or read polling results. He felt it everywhere he went. Cheers for Kate, acclaim for William, and polite silence, or worse, boos, for him. During a recent visit to Wales, when Charles was presented at a public engagement, the audience reacted with apparent unease. Some people turned their backs. Others displayed Princess Diana-related signals. One witness allegedly yelled, "Give it to William!" It wasn't only a hit to the ego, it was an indication that the throne alone could no longer compel reverence. Behind the palace walls, things were unraveling quickly. Multiple insiders have stated that Charles has begun to transform in recent months. He grew reclusive, missing important royal events, or assigning them to William and Kate without explanation. At first, it was attributed to fatigue or jet lag, but aides began to notice patterns. Charles was sleeping at unusual hours, yelling at staff, and disappearing into private rooms for hours without communicating. One longtime palace staffer described seeing Charles alone in a drawing parlor at Clarence House, surrounded by old photo albums. He was looking at a photo of Diana cradling a young Harry and William. tears streaming down his cheeks. The employee didn't say anything. They just departed, closing the door behind them. The most worrying event occurred at Balmoral, the Queen's cherished Scottish residence. According to sources, Charles experienced an emotional collapse. After a pleasant meal, he went to the library and didn't return for over 12 hours. When staffers eventually located him, he was disheveled and repeating phrases from a Diana interview that he had obviously rewatched on his iPad. One confidant said Charles muttered, "I stole everything from her. How do I wear this crown?" It was not caught on camera. There were no headlines about it. However, within the palace, the king's mental and emotional breakdown was difficult to ignore, and as Charles became increasingly unstable, his inner group shrank. Princess Anne, previously his closest confidant, allegedly distanced herself, claiming differences in approach. Prince Edward was also observed exiting a private meeting, appearing obviously distressed, refusing to reply when asked whether the king was okay. But probably the most significant sign came from Prince William himself. William, who had always been reserved and courteous, began to act more assertively. He took on more public responsibilities. He had secret meetings with Parliament liaisons. Most importantly, he stopped supporting his father during private talks. According to a source close to Kensington Palace, William informed a top staffer, "We're almost done." He can't do it. Even royal physicians got engaged, privately encouraging the king to limit his public tasks and relax. But resting wouldn't mend what was wrong. Charles was at odds with his legacy, tormented by remorse, fatigue, and the terrible awareness that he was never the king the people desired. The weight of Diana's memories, the constant public glare, and decades of unresolved pain had finally driven him over the edge. And somewhere in the solitude of Sandringham, in a chamber no one visits without permission, Charles looked at himself in the mirror, not as a king, but as a man, and finally voiced what the entire country had been thinking for years. "I don't belong here." The descent has begun. There was no going back. If Charles was drifting away from the throne, Camilla was clutching it with both hands. For years, she had worked tooth and nail to restore her public image. From the other woman to queen consort in a coronation gown, she earned every inch of ground by determination, political manipulation, and persistent public relations. But underneath the smiles and carefully written comments, Camilla had one aim in mind: to never be sidelined again. So when Charles floated the notion of stepping down, Camilla not only disagreed, but erupted. Camilla's reaction to Charles' utterance of the term abdicate, according to various palace sources, was immediate and explosive. In a private meeting inside Clarence House, she allegedly jumped up, pointed straight at him and said, "You owe me more than this. I sacrificed everything for this crown." A staff member recounted hearing a crystal decanter fall against the wall, followed by the slamming of a hefty oak door. Camilla allegedly rushed out, yelling down the corridor, "Over my dead body!" Camilla viewed Charles's resignation as more than a personal betrayal. It was the end of her decades-long quest to be legitimized. This wasn't just about handing up the crown. It was also about losing the fight she felt she'd won. She had faced tabloid torture, public demonstrations, and years of cold treatment from the Queen herself. And just when she had carved out a place for herself atop the monarchy, her husband threatened to burn everything down. The Queen consort did not sit idly by. According to reports, Camilla engaged palace legal consultants as well as her own lawyers to discuss the constitutional issues. While the monarchy does not grant authority to the sovereign spouse, Camilla thought she had earned a permanent seat at the table and was unwilling to let it slip away. One story circulating around Buckingham indicated Camilla inquired about the legitimacy of preserving her title if Charles stepped down. But legalities were the least of her concerns. The true threat was public opinion, which had always been against her. When rumors of Charles' impending abdication began to circulate, social media exploded. Hashtags like #QueenKateNow and #Diana1 trended for several days. Camilla was brought back into public court, where she had always been deemed guilty by millions. Many people laughed at the concept that she might continue to be an authoritative figure in a post-Charles kingdom. Even within the firm, her support began to dwindle. Princess Anne, who had always been friendly but aloof, allegedly declined to support Camilla's concerns, claiming, "The people have already chosen." Prince Edward remained silent. And William? He declined to meet with her completely. Camilla, alone, outraged, and witnessing her decades-long journey fall in slow motion, entered a combative and unstable condition, according to one assistant. She canceled engagements. She reportedly chastised long-serving employees. Behind the scenes, she made veiled threats that if she was dismissed, the whole truth would come out. But the firm was unfazed, because this time, it was not about pleasing Camilla. It was about preserving the monarchy. For the first time since Diana's death, the royal machine showed little interest in preserving Camilla Parker Bowles. Charles was slipping. The crown was shifting. Camilla, once the architect of her own salvation, was now the architect of her own demise. She had battled all her life to sit alongside the throne. Now she was seeing it vanish. While King Charles was unraveling and Camilla was furious behind closed doors, Prince William was already acting, quietly, carefully, and with a precision that communicated a clear message. The future is coming, whether you like it or not. William had spent much of his life playing the obedient son. He smiled at events, posed for photos, and said the appropriate things. But underneath the calm veneer sat a guy who knew power, and more importantly, time. And now, time has run out. According to royal sources, the Prince of Wales had been planning for this occasion for months. Even before Charles's health and mental state began to deteriorate, William allegedly began having clandestine meetings with royal advisors, senior members of the Privy Council, and even Parliament contacts behind closed doors. One source characterized it as stage managing a landing rather than waiting in the wings. He was not advocating for his father to abdicate. He was assuring that when the time came, the institution would not collapse. But suddenly, something changed. Charles started canceling public appearances. Staff workers began leaking murmurs of restless nights and episodes, and public attitude became colder by the week. And Camilla? She was simply making matters worse. During that ideal storm, William allegedly offered a calm but stern ultimatum: decide now, or it will be decided for you. The moment occurred in Sandringham, away from the cameras. It was not a yelling battle. It was not furious. It was strategic. William sat across from his father, with only 2 advisors present, and spelled forth the facts. The monarchy's credibility was eroding. The populace no longer trusted Charles. The press was sharpening its knives. If Charles does not make a choice soon, the headlines will do it for him. Charles, still driven by duty and pride, pushed back. He reminded William about the oath he swore, but William did not flinch. According to one person in the room, the prince calmly stated, "You promised to serve. You never promised to sink the ship with me." Then came the master strike. Prince William had secretly enlisted Princess Anne, the same Anne who hardly takes sides, the same Anne who has received more military decorations than most of the males in her family. She arrived at Sandringham a day later, allegedly following a lengthy phone talk with William. When Charles brought up the topic again, Anne simply said, "You've done what you can. It is time to pass it over." That moment shattered something inside the king. Anne was not emotional. She was not harsh, but she was done. Her comments passed on the heritage of their mother, Queen Elizabeth. For Charles, that was the only voice that could break through the cacophony. The tone altered after that. William began liaising with palace workers to ensure that the handover went well. Emergency meetings were convened to brief top courtiers. Legal advisors were contacted. Plans were made to announce the transfer as a modern constitutional evolution rather than a resignation. Behind the scenes, William sought to safeguard Catherine. He made it plain that if he were to assume the throne, Kate would not be a passive consort. She would be his equal, a fellow heir with all except name. Diana had been denied the throne, but Catherine would not. William wasn't simply stepping in. He was taking charge. For the first time in decades, the monarchy's future seemed secure. It seemed inevitable. While Charles faltered and Camilla fumed, Catherine, Princess of Wales, did what she does best. She led without saying anything. For years, the populace speculated about when William would become king. However, their true emphasis was shifting away from him and toward her. Kate had grown from a quiet university student to one of the most admired women on the globe. In recent months, her presence has discreetly surpassed that of all other royals, even the king. Observers observed it first during public appearances. The crowd roared louder for Kate than Charles. When she walked into a room, everyone turned to look at her. People listened to what she spoke because of her elegance, not her volume. While Charles held on to archaic conventions and Camilla sought legitimacy, Kate just earned it. Her calendar was full of solo engagements, more than ever before. She visited schools, hospitals, addiction treatment facilities, and military locations. The frequency, however, did not strike royal observers as particularly noteworthy. It was the tone. Kate had begun to talk with a level of power that was beyond royal etiquette. Her comments held weight. She no longer resembled someone training for the position of queen. She appeared to be already there. According to sources inside Kensington Palace, Kate has always served as William's emotional anchor. However, in recent months, she has evolved into something more, a strategist. While William was making moves with the firm and negotiating with senior royals, Kate was handling the most difficult task of all, maintaining public trust. Her immaculate appearances, empathy-filled remarks, and viral moments with youngsters and the elderly were more than simply wonderful. They were purposeful. This was not PR. This was preparation. Senior aides allegedly began addressing her privately as Your Majesty, not mockingly, but out of habit. Foreign dignitaries who were invited to events given by William and Kate increasingly referred to her as Queen Catherine in private communications. According to an anonymous source from a recent NATO banquet, a key European official stated that she already carries herself like the Queen of England. That sparked muted outrage in one royal household, Clarence House. Camilla, still irritated at being eclipsed at practically every public appearance, attempted to retake ground. She tried to dominate news coverage with showy clothing, greater entourages, and even requested front-row seats at ceremonial occasions. But it simply backfired. Side-by-side photographs of Camilla staring at Kate or awkwardly looking away quickly became viral social media content. The populace saw the contrast and selected their queen. But it wasn't only public admiration that distinguished Kate, it was her discipline. While other royals spilled information, made mistakes, or lashed out, Kate remained mute. She never commented on the controversy. She has never defended herself, and yet she never had to. Her stillness became her power, and in a family torn apart by scandal and ego, that made her the most powerful person in the room. Even Buckingham Palace workers apparently began planning for a changeover with Kate at the lead. One person confessed it would be a relief. She knows how to lead without causing chaos. Kate's ascension was quiet. It was not coerced. It was gained year after year, minute by moment, by making the right decisions. And now, as the monarchy teetered and Charles failed, there was one unbreakable fact behind every royal door. The people had already crowned her. It did not happen on a big stage. There were no royal trumpets, camera flashes, or balcony waves. It happened in a quiet drawing room at Sandringham, with the curtains partially drawn and the air dense with silence. King Charles sat alone at first, nursing an untouched cup of tea, while three important persons entered the room: Princess Anne, Prince William, and Sir Clive Alderton, his confidential secretary. Behind them was a solitary royal attendant, entrusted with documenting whatever happened next. The king appeared older than usual, exhausted, pallid, and stooped, as if the weight of the crown had last become tangible. For a long time he said nothing. His hands shook slightly, and then, with the voice of a man bearing decades of shame and unfinished business, he spoke something no one expected to hear so soon. "I'm abdicating." Sir Clive hesitated, wondering how to answer. Anne dropped her sight. William didn't say anything, but his eyes met his father's, not with judgment, but with certainty. Charles continued. He did not read from notes. He did not issue royal decrees. He just spoke as a guy who has reached the conclusion of his journey. "This throne will never fit me, and recently it has been breaking me. I do not want to die clinging to it. I want to let it go before I cause it to fall." The room remained quiet. Anne allegedly nodded once and remarked, "Then it's settled." William placed his palm on the table to anchor the moment. This was not a coup. It was not coerced. It was a surrender, and for the first time, Charles appeared relieved. But what happened next took Anne by surprise. Charles went to Sir Clive and said, "When we draft the announcement, I want it to be clear. It's not only William, it's William and Catherine, joint heirs. That's how we start the new age." Sir Clive stuttered, wondering whether such a thing could be publicized without constitutional ramifications, but Charles brushed him aside. "Make it work," he instructed. "The country needs a queen in whom it can believe. Catherine already is." Camilla wasn't present. In fact, she was reportedly invited to stay at Ray Mill House when emotions rose during earlier encounters. Her absence was both symbolic and intentional. This was a transfer of power, and she wasn't involved. That same evening, palace officials began writing what would become the most delicate royal declaration in decades. They pondered the phrasing for several hours. Should they say abdicate? Should they mention transition? But Charles was obvious. "Be honest. I am not dying. I am standing away." There is no shame in that. Before the final document was locked, Charles allegedly sat alone in the room once more. An assistant who entered momentarily later said that the king was looking out the window into the evening light. When asked if he needed anything, Charles responded quietly, "Tell them this is what Diana would have wanted." He made a remark that no one had expected, but everyone knew what that meant. For decades, the monarchy attempted to erase history, change the narrative, and ignore the flaws under the surface. But now, in a single act of giving up control, Charles had recognized not just his limits, but also his shame, failings, and perhaps most crucially, his wife's legacy. The crown was shifting. The monarchy was evolving. And for the first time since that fatal night in Paris, it appeared like the royal family had finally listened. Diana's son would now occupy the throne, as would the lady who would complete what Diana never had the opportunity to begin. In the end, it was not a revolt that transformed the monarchy. It was a man finally speaking the truth. King Charles' decision to resign signaled more than simply the end of his brief and turbulent reign. It was the closure of a wound that had been bleeding quietly for decades. Diana is the name of a wound, a legacy that no crowning gown, gilded chariot, or well-edited documentary could erase. They had never moved on, and deep down, neither did Charles. By abdicating, he did more than simply hand up the crown. He proposed something far more unusual in royal history, a reckoning, an acknowledgement that the monarchy had lost its path and that its existence rested on transformation rather than tradition. William exemplifies duty without ego. Catherine exemplifies kindness without drama. Together, they signify healing, not simply the future. A return to Diana's ideals of empathy, honesty, and service. Not flawless, but human. And it is what caused the world to pause when the news was made. The palace did not fire. The country did not collapse. Instead, something unusual happened. People cheered. They applauded for a new chapter, for a clean slate, for a king and queen who had not battled their way to the top, but had earned it incrementally, year after year. Camilla was deafeningly silent. Charles' final bow was heartbreaking. But in that moment, with William and Kate standing at the gates of Buckingham Palace, hand in hand, supported by their children, and carrying the weight of a nation's hope, one thing was clear. The monarchy had not ended. It had been reborn. Not gold, but elegance. Not in power.